Have you ever wished you could travel all over the world and meet masterful people in the field of education? People you may not have known and the stories you've never heard. Cup of Capacity is just that. I wanted to introduce you to masterful people in education. Some are people I have known, and some I have heard about. They were chosen for their unique impact on education and to share the insights they've learned along the way. In a digital setting, each monthly episode features an in-depth conversation with a masterful leader as they explore their journey and answer a series of questions. Grab a refreshment and let's enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cup of Capacity. We're so excited to have you with us here today. I'm super thrilled to introduce a new friend of mine, Helen Chan-Hill. For many of you guys who started out watching, most of you in Texas, we're expanding out. And so Helen is my first person outside of Texas, and I'm excited to introduce you to her. Helen serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction and Professional Development for the Pasadena Unified School District. She's also a doctoral student at Pepperdine University. And as someone who just finished her doctoral work last summer, I completely feel what that life is like for you, Helen. She came into education via Teach for America, and actually I have known and know quite a few amazing people who've been through Teach for America, so it has a special place in my heart for sure. She serves on the board of Association of Pasadena School Administrators, and she has such a love for leaders at all level, including school administrators, but that could also be campus leaders as teachers. And then really supporting our students as they go through their journey to become leaders themselves. I'm so excited to welcome Helen today. And Helen, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. And thank you so much, Mechiel, for inviting me. Thank you to our good friend Cindy for making the connection. I'm honored to be your first non-Texan to be on Cup of Capacity. And I did want to just tell the folks that when Mechiel shared the samples of others who have spoken before, I was actually really inspired. And I have a lot of attachment to life stories, because I think, that's what we're all made up of. I obsessively watch the Olympics for those life stories of the athletes and the 30 for 30s on ESPN. And I feel like it's amazing that someone has created sort of a platform for educators to elevate their inspiration to others too. So I'm humbled. I know that what I'm going to share today is really personal to me, but if there's anything that someone gleans out of it, then I'm, very honored to have been a part of that. So with that, yes, I'm over here in sunny California. We were just talking about the snow that's about to hit Houston. And I regret to say it's like 80 degrees and it's going to be really warm this weekend. And so I'm actually trying to keep the sun out of my eyes, but also what I love about being here in Southern California. So my journey actually didn't begin here though. I'm going to kind of start with like the personal background here. And I often, I tell this story sometimes when I'm actually talking to groups of people about the journey to leadership, which is that I sort of have a tale of two families. And one is the immediate family that I was a part of growing up. And then the other is the immediate family that I'm a part of that I got to build myself now. Of course, those two families are intersected, but they kind of phase out in time. And so my journey actually began in a little alpine village in Italy, where I was born. And which is always something that people, find surprising, because yes, I am absolutely ethnically Chinese. But there was a long story of how my parents ended up there, which one day I'll write into a book, but it's not for now. But it does really catapult me into a lot of what my beliefs are now about education. And they obviously were not original. They're not Italian. They moved there from a country called Burma, now known as Myanmar, which is also sadly recently in the news, but for similar reasons, some government upheaval and opportunity elsewhere. And they came from very different backgrounds. My mother in a well-to-do government family, my father a member of one of the servants' families in their household. And so we could talk about the, very Romeo and Juliet-esque capacity there. But what it really taught me was that there are always barriers that can be broken, and who you become is not always determined by how you came into this world. And so there they were in Italy. I have two brothers. I'm in the middle. And my father actually died quite young. I was only 2 at the time, and my mother became a single mom in a country that was very foreign to her, with a chemistry degree that she wasn't utilizing, and with 3 really young children under the age of 3. And so she immigrated here to the United States, where her family had come, and here in California, where there was a lot more diversity and a lot more ability for her to maybe, enter the economic, community and really just provide better for us. My father actually was a physician in Italy, and so there was a lot of understanding that education was going to be important for us. That was sort of his dying wish, that she made sure that we would get through college, and she had a deep commitment to it. So when we came to California, that was really sort of the drive and the passion that she had, was make sure that my children finish, make sure that they get to whatever access points that they need. And she really thought that that access would be here. And what surprised me, while I definitely think I've benefited from being a part of the public school system here in California, and really just growing up, feeling very supported in a lot of my academic endeavors. What I also was surprised to find was that our educational system also really cut me off from some things that probably would have been important in my life beyond academics. And what I'm speaking to is specifically sort of a policy that was in place when we arrived in the United States, where in California, bilingual education wasn't seen at the time to be something that was good for kids, which is shocking for us to think about now, given all that we know about language acquisition. And so here I come speaking parts of Chinese and parts of Italian and very little English. But my mother, who speaks 5 languages, was completely fine with, that's fine, we're going to learn languages, we can acquire lots of languages. But the teachers, who she really put a lot of trust in, and the school administrators at the time, told her, if you speak English, or if you speak in another language, she's never going to acquire that English. And so for the betterment of our future, my mom felt it was much more important for us to speak English well than for us to have a connection to her and her family. And so that bond was broken when we stopped speaking Chinese in the household. There still to this day, we laugh, but there are always misunderstandings, lost in translation. But of course, she's my mother, we understand each other, but not with the fluidity that you have when you've got a native language in both of your minds. And so to this day, I'm very much affected by that particular course that we took, because of an educator's expertise and because of the recommendation of policy that was in place. And so I'm really cognizant in the work that I do now, that we have to be mindful not only of what is the impact that we might have on something that's beyond the academic when we talk about family, but also what kind of structures did we put in place that really enable or disable kids to be their whole selves. And so for me, yes, I thrived academically. I mean, that model minority myth was something that very much followed me throughout my career, but it gave me access to a lot of things, advanced placement classes, honors courses, that maybe I otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And that's something that I'll talk about later in my journey too. But what it didn't do was it didn't allow me to thrive social emotionally within my own family. And so I was very much affected by that experience. Additionally, I was really affected by watching my mom as a single mother of 3 young children, who I knew was extraordinarily capable, with her master's level chemistry work and her ability to be fluid in multiple languages, and her, brilliance, be very much viewed as a foreigner who might not be that intelligent by a lot of folks that she intended to work with here. And I saw her really shut out of the school system, where counselors and principals would come to me to maybe talk about my brother and his, lack of homework submission, versus going to my mother. And then also just being sort of the language broker in our household, where formal documents when we were applying for FAFSA and applying to colleges, where I would end up translating for my mother so that she would make sure she was signing the right things. And so I really understood that sort of undue burden on young kids, from immigrant families, from non-native English speaking families. but also the undue burden on those intelligent and capable adults that are raising them, but maybe being faced with different perceptions of what their ability is. And so it really became clear to me that the educational system, though meant to really help and support kids to success, can sometimes just do some damaging things that don't necessarily produce that. So that's sort of been a lot of what my passion was at the start. And I didn't know that I wanted to go into education. I knew that I wanted to go into a field of service. I had, God blessed me with a compassionate heart. And I really felt that there was somewhere that I needed to serve. I didn't know necessarily that it was education, but the bridge here was I did, like I mentioned, I went through the whole public school system, really thought I understood what public education was about. Even I went to UC Berkeley, a public university, and really just felt like, okay, I just have thrived and feel so supportive of what public school educators do for all kids, believing that the access was for everyone. And then again, because I wasn't sure that education was the way, I actually joined Teach for America, which Mechiel, you're very familiar with. And I did my teaching stint in Houston at Yates High School. So that's my one familiarity there with Houston, and loved it. But again, thought it's a 2-year commitment. I can do this for a couple years, and then really figure out what it is that I want to do. So fast forward to the tale of the other family. And I was placed in Pasadena Unified, which is the district that I'm still working in 23 years later. What was fascinating to me was it's a public school system, and I sort of anticipated that I was a public school student. I have a lot of familiarity with how we do business, and yet it was completely different. I realized that the socioeconomic, community that I grew up in was very different than the one that I'm serving in now. And our public schools ended up being different, that the societal pressures in either of our 2 cities were very different, and therefore our public schools were different. And in the school that I was placed, I actually met my future husband, who was also a first-year teacher when I got there. And what was frustrating was that we had the same mentor teacher, and he had so much success his first year, really connected with students, built a lot of good relationships, didn't have the classroom management issues, whereas having kids turn over desks, throw pencils at me, just all of that in my first year. And my mentor teacher would say, well, go and see what Mr. Hill's doing that's working. And I would go to him and I'd say, I can't do any of that. And the reason being, he actually grew up in the district. He actually had grown up across the street from where we were teaching in the Kings Manor projects. And he was a product of PUSD, and he knew the community very well. And as a man of color, he also really had a particular way of connecting with the students where they saw themselves and trusted him with sort of an immediacy that doesn't come with the way that I look or walk into a room. And that was something that I had to really learn and just sort of humble myself in understanding that you don't get to just have relationships with kids because you're nice or because you want to, but that you have to earn their respect and their trust. And that's something that he had done, through his life. And we're having very different results. It wasn't about having the best classroom management plan or the progressive discipline plan. It was about connecting with the kids. And so I'm forever grateful that our mentor teacher constantly threw us together to the point where, hate became like and like became the tale of the next family. So I'm going to show you a quick picture. So that's my husband there on the left and our 2 babies at the time that they were babies, but that was like 10 years ago. So imagine them all grown up, walking around and one of them heading into middle school, which anyway, it's a whole nother bag. But in really getting to know a lot about, perceiving how I almost had implicit biases about teaching and about what public schools would do, I really unearthed a lot of truths about the public school systems that I realized did not actually provide access for all. It provided access for me, my brothers, and our friends, and maybe our community. But working here, I felt a really stronger calling to really understand better why these structures and these systems weren't working for everyone when we say that they are and that they should. And additionally, when we've positioned public schools to be the ones that serve all, because we don't choose who comes into our schools, and we don't select, and we don't ask for tuition, and we don't all of these things, and yet we're not really producing success for every child. So that's sort of been why, my 2-year stint with Teach for America in Pasadena Unified was up, and I thought, I'm not done. I think there's just still a lot more to do, and a lot more for me to learn, and really throw myself into. And 2 years became 3, and 3 years became 23. And so I still very much feel like my work isn't done. I started out, obviously, as a classroom teacher, as I mentioned, in middle school. I taught every subject under the sun, not as a multiple subject, but California at the time had a lot of emergency credentials, so I'm very accustomed to flexibility and just doing what needs to get done. I came in teaching English, and then suddenly had a history class, and then suddenly had a math class, and then said, let's go get the math credential, and then came back and admittedly didn't teach science, but but just spent a lot of time getting to know lots of different kids in lots of different contexts and lots of different subjects, but realizing that the one core thing in the middle was that they all wanted success. And how could I give it to them? It didn't matter which subject it was. It didn't matter which grade level. It was just, how do I help? How do I get out of the way sometimes, so that they can really be who they deserve to be, and already are. And so that really brought me into this sort of thought about, what are my core beliefs around here? I had sort of taken a mission statement from Teach for America to propel me into education, which was that all students should have the equal opportunity to achieve. And when I got into the schools, that's when I started to see equal opportunity has a lot to do with what we decide. And as a classroom teacher, you often think, well, I don't get to make the rules, like my principal makes the rules. And the principal thinks, I don't get to make the rules, the district makes the rules. Well, now I'm here at the central office. And I can tell you that as a coordinator, then as a director, and now as assistant superintendent, I don't think I get to make the rules either. But what I have learned is that I get to influence things. And how do you use that influence for what you believe in? And so the core beliefs that I've really kind of thought about and honed over the years, and much credit to Cindy Purrier, who, through her core beliefs activities kind of made me inspect it a little bit deeper, which is that I really believe that every individual is treated as such and deserves respect. But also that because of that, I have to know that everyone can contribute and everyone can learn. And so I think when we think about leadership in a school system or in an organization or whatever, we sometimes think about it as, I'm the one making decisions, or I'm the one making the rules. But really what it is understanding that if your core beliefs are about someone's capacity, then your job is to ensure that that capacity gets to be illuminated and maximized. And so what I really think about is that term people talk about is servant leadership. And I don't know that I would have termed myself as a servant leadership, but I definitely know that I'm here to serve. And so I have a few leadership lessons that I've really thought about over the years. And I know I haven't really talked specifically about the jobs that I do for the district, but I feel like a lot of these lessons are interwoven, whether I was a teacher or whether I was doing the professional development coordination, or whether now superintendent making decisions around the curriculum, or teacher support. All of these things have persisted in any of those roles. And those 3 lessons, I'll list them and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about them.
Sure.
Authenticity, service, and deviance. And I did intentionally use the word deviance because it gets people's attention, but I'll get there. So with authenticity, I think often about Bill George. He wrote the Find Your True North, that book, and in there he talks about authentic leadership, with the sense that you're always faced with these dueling narratives of who you want to be, what things shaped you, and these crucible moments that were hard for you to get through, but because of that they shaped you. And I know I shared with you at the start about sort of that crucible story of my mother's, transition here, and then the sort of the impact that had on me as a child, and then now through my career. But also knowing that the crucibles of the people that I care about really tell a story too, that can impact how we see ourselves as leaders. But those dueling narratives are what really brings to you this idea of your ethical value. And I think that especially in education, when our responsibility is the care of young lives, then the ethical responsibility is tantamount. Like it just has to be at the center. And if I were not doing my job well, then I have an ethical responsibility to step aside. One of the things that I don't think I shared with you earlier is that in every promotion that I've gotten, I haven't sought it out other than my very first step into administration. When I came into teaching, that the experiences that I had, with department chairs pulling me and saying, hey, I want you to be part of this particular magnet program and let's build it together. Or when my principal said, here, this was an opportunity for you to be involved in a committee at the, folks have always kind of said, I think that you would be good for this, which either tells you that I'm not thinking and paying attention, or it tells you that people are seeing that maybe I'm following my core beliefs, and that might be something that could be good for others. I did seek my first administrative job, but then after that, it was just the superintendent coming and saying, you know what, you actually have been affecting more than just professional development. I think we need to expand your role, and here's something that I want you to consider. Would you apply for it? And then, to as recently as this particular role, for 2 years, having my boss very wonderfully tell me, I think you really need to do this job. I think you really need this job, until she finally just said, you just need to do this job. So there you go. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it really isn't about which position you hold or what its title is. It's about what is the work that you need to do 100% because of your ethical responsibility to this work, and do it to the nth degree. And so I just have a really strong passion for that because we're with children. And so authenticity is a big lesson that I've learned all throughout. From that first moment when my husband, watching him teach when he was not my husband, and seeing his success, and seeing me trying every, trick in the book and not getting any results with kids, it was the authenticity. He came in knowing what his ethical responsibility was, and therefore decision-making was natural to him. Whereas for me, it was like, okay, what if I strategically did this? What if I did this? There's a place for that, but not if you don't lead first with your purpose and your ethical value. So there was that. Then service. I think I have to always know who I serve and why I serve them. And that, I've spoken a lot about how it really is about the students. And that's what I always have to come back to, because, and because you've been in the upper echelons of doctoral work as well as, administration, there are a lot of people who sometimes get sidetracked by adult agendas. And working with any kind of system in a public school, there are politics, of course, and I don't envy any of the leaders who are in those kind of positions where they have to negotiate those kind of agreements and things. And political agendas typically exist because people believe their ask is the best for somebody. And so there's no negativity about it, but it is something that that always reminds me that we can get distracted by what adults need, what adults want, and what adults think is best. But we serve students. And so if we can center that and remember that it's their voice that is the most important, then we aren't going to lose our way, because times change. And therefore, kids will let us know what has changed. And an example that I often think about is just how, when I was teaching, and now I feel horrible that I've been out of the classroom for more than a decade, when we were teaching, cell phones weren't really pervasive.
Right.
I mean, I didn't get a cell phone until I started working. So that tells you I didn't even have a cell phone in college. So it's been a while. So, but I never had to deal with, checking the cell phone at the door, or whether kids would cheat on a cell phone or not. Well, I also didn't really have a good empathy for teachers struggling with that, because I had not taught with that. And also my children were young, so I didn't see it. Well, my son is in 5th grade. and it's distance learning, so everything is digital. And he has been, kind of dropping some things on, oh, so-and-so told me we should do this, and so-and-so said this, and then I found a hack for this. And I said, it sounds a little bit like you're cheating. And so, and he said, no, this is allowable. This is allowable. So, I contacted his teacher just to be like, I just want you to know if there are any safeguards you need to put in place. And he said, no, I encourage them to do that. That's research. I encourage them to do this because that's collaboration. And I thought, I am so out of touch that I didn't even recognize how you could pivot like a construct into an actual learning and moment and skill. And so I said, you're right. Absolutely, I'm out of the times right now. And so it just was a reminder that in that instance, it was my son, but in other instances, it's other kids who will remind you, like, this is what the current, state of affairs is, and this is what we do. And yes, we can still be very capable and mindful people while doing this. So I love that. But anyhow, so that brings me sort of to my last lesson that I really learned, and that's the deviance. And so this is something that I actually credit Kim Cameron. He's at University of Michigan, and I've watched so many talks. I've never met him, but I mean, just lots of mind-blowing things that really he made me think about. And this idea that positive influence is actually deviant behavior. Because if you think about like that bell curve, right? It's just standard deviation. Like there's the norm, and then there is a lot of negativity, and then there's a lot of positivity. And so how can we harness our positions as leaders to be positive deviants? Because what we're really doing is we're stepping out of the norm. That typically, I know that walking into any school or meeting that involves educators, we have similar gripes. And we tend to have similar solutions for those gripes, but yet we're kind of still stuck in the same cycle. And a lot of those gripes end up really turning into deficit thoughts and deficit gaps. Whereas really, if we switched it and we went to the other side of the deviant scale and we said, what are our abundance gaps? What are the things that our students have, and what are they ready for next? I think that a lot of our role as leaders is to maintain that type of a conversation and lens for those who we can influence, because we are potentially in public positions, because we have a wider circle of influence, or just simply because we have more responsibilities, and therefore it's inherent that we have to make sure that we focus on abundance so that students are really put into that position of having their power really seen and having their what they come with really seen. So essentially, those are that's my leadership journey and my leadership thoughts.
Well, thank you, Helen. This has been so rich. I want to go back to a couple of things. I wanted to ask you your thoughts. As we were preparing for this interview, we talked about the work that you were doing around language and literacy, and you shared that at the front end. And I was really struck and thinking about, I think many of us in education have bumped into the concept of language and language acquisition in different ways, depending on your life experience. And so, as a teacher, I was a bilingual teacher, always teaching in Spanish, and I had the opportunity to live in South America. But in no way is my life experience similar to your experience, because the experience of a child or a mother immigrating due to a need, whether positive or negative, whatever, is not the same as somebody who's like, let's say 21, who chooses and elects to go and learn language or immerse themselves in language. And then, as life goes on, my son was in a dual language program, again, electing to that. And so I was thinking as you were describing your experience, and I think everything you shared was so absolutely rich, but do you want to say a little bit more about that concept? I think sometimes people who haven't had a big array of experience, sometimes will not confused, but the difference between, if someone's having to immigrate due to whatever reason, and they're just the act of immigrating is a significant in a person's life. But then on top of that, acquiring a new language and entering into an educational system and culture that's newly different, as opposed to a more adult or developed person who then elects to, or even a young child elects to be in dual language programming. Like to me, those are very different. And sometimes they get lumped together, especially like when we're creating policy and decision making. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
I love that you asked this question. It also makes me think that you and I are going to have a relationship long after this episode of Cup of Capacity is over. I actually have, that is something that is very deep in my heart, in terms of even wanting to learn more about question, because there are definitely acknowledgments of patterns that you see in various sort of trajectories around language choice and language development. And I think you're absolutely right, because immigration, even though for us it was a choice to immigrate from Italy to America, but for my parents in immigrating from Burma to Italy, it wasn't so much a choice. It was government upheaval. It was safety. It was an issue there. But they had the benefit of having, well, my mother having gone to a school where she learned multiple languages and therefore was a little bit better equipped to do the transition here. Not to Italy. I don't think she ever anticipated that. But I do think about how my father, being a native Chinese speaker and also a native Burmese speaker, having grown up there, had to learn Italian to go to school. He completed all of university and medical school in Italy. He did it all in Italian. I mean, I wish he was here for me to ask, but no. And then my mother here positioning herself to really be someone who could take care of us, but with a second language lens. She could understand, she could read, she could write English, but it was just that there was an accent and therefore a perception that came with it. And so I do know that while she may have felt empowered to make the choice to come here and really feeling like she was making this decision, that some of those microaggressions that we maybe wouldn't have been aware of are things that really affected it, versus fast forward to this nice little multicultural family that my children are always reminding me that I have, is I've put them in the Mandarin dual language program. And here they are reconnecting me to this heritage that I was cut off from. And I can get kind of emotional about it. But, and that was a choice that we made as a very empowered family that had those options, that we weren't doing it because of necessity that they needed to learn Mandarin, but we're doing it as an additive language because yay, it'll reconnect us to our heritage, and as well, it might, give you more opportunities on a global sphere later in life and on all of these wonderful benefits. But I still think so much about that, that child that I was and the adult that my mother was, coming here and facing a very different perspective on having multilingual skills. And therefore knowing that we still have kids that are coming to us as 15-year-olds, as 7-year-olds, whatever, speaking another language and needing to acquire English, and what kind of superiority or inferiority do we place on their ability to speak multiple languages? Because I can say that my children, especially because they, they are very much perceived as Black, they're always very surprising to people when they speak in Mandarin. But then when they see me as a mom, oh, okay, it must have come from you and things, and oh, how wonderful that they speak both languages, etc. Versus children that I taught in English language development, who also have incredible skills from in other languages, and we tell them, you got to learn the English first. We're going to assess you on English. We're going to judge you based on your ability to use English. And what does that do to sort of their affect as well, and their belief in their value to our community? So I don't know necessarily if I got to answering your exact question, but I will agree with you that there is that spectrum, and that we have to inspect what are the perceptions and notions that we put on each person involved on that end of the spectrum. I don't believe that my children deserve commendation for having an additive language, maybe commendation for working hard, but and therefore I also don't believe that my students would have, deserved, criticism for not speaking English perfectly. So
you use the word additive, and it took me back to when I was first listening to your story, because I kept thinking of additive and subtractive, and because
Mm,
thinking of like a native person electing to be in a dual program, which is phenomenal. You and I are both big proponents,
mhm,
as opposed to looking at someone who has immigrated and needs to acquire English. Like, they're totally perceived, in my opinion and life experience, as two totally different things. And it's, to me, it's such a dichotomy of thought. Like, these are totally different experiences, but the bottom line is you're adding a language. And but somehow children who immigrate to the US who do not have language, um, for a multitude of reasons in the US, like, it's seen as, like, to me, almost like subtractive, like, because you need to subtract
mm,
your culture, your language, and you just need to acquire English and assimilate. But then we have people who have lived here, and then it's like lauded, this is great, you're going to add these languages, and it's seen as such a great thing. And I hope that in our lifetime we can see a subtle shift. And that's a question, that I would pose to you, is that we are in a much more global society. When I
mm.
think about when I was in high school, as opposed to, I have a son who's graduating high school, and our experiences, and you even mentioned, how your son was collaborating with friends. And I've had similar experiences where I'm like, are you cheating? Like, what you're doing? We know that sometimes adults have trouble collaborating, and really they are learning, whether it's on a Zoom, whether it's via text, whether it's Instagram, on whatever methodology, they're learning the ability to support each other and communicate. And so I think that in some ways they'll be much better prepared for the workplace, because they now know how to collaborate in lots of different modes, where we've had to kind of ramp up this year through, as we've quarantined. But do you feel like, I hope that in our lifetime, like, there will be a shift, because we are much more global, and maybe our children, as they become parents many years from now, that that it'll take on a global sense of, like, this idea that adding language, that there should never be subtraction. Like, we're going to honor and respect everybody's language. And you and I both know, having been through this life, looking at language, that there's language, and then there's not content and content knowledge. And you mentioned your mom, she was very well educated and had a lot of skill and knowledge, but that wasn't always probably honored or respected. And then it's just kind of, it gets shuffled to the back. And I can only imagine the impact that has on a person's self-esteem. But I think about children who are currently in our system, and I hope that in our lifetime we can see that shift, where we endeavor to find out, what are you bringing, and we can celebrate and respect that, and then build upon that.
I love the way you said that, Michelle. I think, in a funny kind of, I got lots of stories. But, my two brothers actually live on two different continents. So, like, family all over. So one brother's in Australia, so it's English, right? And then the other lived in Tokyo in Japan for a time. And actually he's now in San Antonio. And it was interesting too, even to think about how he wanted to raise his children multilingual, and how right now it's seen as additive, right? But then when he was even over there, it was seen very in a subtractive way, that he couldn't produce in Japanese. And coming from Southern California, he was just like, what you think I speak English. And it was almost like he didn't really, it was sort of a tables turn type of situation. And he felt it much like the way my mother must have felt it when she was an adult coming here. And so I do think that builds one clear thing, that if you're asking about one day, do we have this? Well, absolutely, if we all can establish that kind of empathy. Because and I don't think that you have to live the experience to become empathetic. You just have to be attentive to the experiences that you're observing as well, in others. And I think that it took me years to really own, you talk about that self-esteem, and luckily I don't think that that it hindered me, but I never really owned that sort of language break. And I would say, yeah, I was an English language learner when I came, because I did, they put me in English language development classes. And I said, but I don't actually have a first language anymore, because the only language I really consider myself fluent in is English. Took foreign language classes and things like that, or world language classes when I was in school, but I would just say it's English. Well, one thing that my daughter actually brought up to me, she said, but how come you can understand Papa when she speaks in Chinese to us? And I said, oh yeah, I understand it. I just can't respond. I said, I can receive it, but I can't produce it. And so my daughter was like, what do you mean? And I said, I think I'm a receptive bilingual. and it was just that moment when I realized how much the system had really instilled in me that I was just a monolingual speaker because there was no value for me to have that other language. And when I sort of reclaimed it with this idea that no, but that's still different than just someone who literally only speaks English and only ever kind of had that. I said, I actually do understand and comprehend when my mother's speaking in Chinese. I just can't produce it. And I said, that's a type of bilingualism as well. And so I think it's that, like you're saying, like, let's not subtract, let's add for everyone. And yeah, I do think that there's a hope that this would happen.
Yeah. So the last question I'll ask you about what you shared, and it's a really, I think more on the personal side than the professional side, but I really do think it plays into this idea of building capacity. And I think it's a very normal journey for every human being to have, whether you're male or female or what, but like, I think we're so busy just growing up and building our lives that we don't always reflect on it. But there does come a point, and I think many times when we start forming our own families and then having children of our own, that we're then able to, in some moments of clarity, reflect back on our parents. I think that's when we really start to really appreciate and compare journeys and experiences. And so I was wondering if, as you looked at your mom and your dad's journey, but especially your mom, since you're a mom yourself, do you feel like that contributes to, I know and assume when you approach the issue of language or English language acquisition or a student, in all of its arrays, I know that you approach it, you're bringing you can't stop yourself from bringing your life experience with you, right? And your knowledge and everything you've experienced. So in the same sense, do you feel like, as you reflect on the journey for your mom, does that play into, do you feel like you have a passion for families in a way that maybe the average Joe doesn't?
That's an interesting question. I would say that I do believe that tends to be something that I prioritize in my thinking. And I would even say that it probably falls short too of even some other folks who are even more vastly familiar with some of the needs of language communities. I, obviously am very much affected by my background, but also really cognizant that there have also been some really significant benefits that I've had that I don't necessarily see in all communities. And so, yes, absolutely. I know that my passion comes from that experience and just really watching a lot of what I would describe as struggle and heartache for my mother, and wanting to just not have everyone go through that. And yet I kind of know that those are defining moments that also really grow you. But if you don't have the right supports around you, they can crush you too. And so I absolutely feel that being a mom is something that every teacher and every educator really kind of is, or a dad. I mean, I'll be fair to the males. So, but because really, like, to me, being a mom is just taking care, right? So my mother, her whole devotion in moving countries was to make sure that we had the life that she promised that she, my father, that she would give us, and really feeling like I made the right choice to make sure that they were positioned for success, and just really giving up her career, giving up even her own, pride, so that, and her ego, to say like, that's fine, just you guys do, and I'll just be back here, because it was, at whatever it takes for you to succeed, I'm going to do it. And I feel like if educators come from that perspective, then that's the kind of sincere, authentic care that we should have for every kid who walks in, because their parents trusted them with us. And I imagine how much my mom trusted those teachers who said, stop speaking to her in Chinese. She trusted them so much, she did. She broke our heritage communication and said, because this will position her better. And so that's why, I mean, I could go into politics too, watching all of the political drama around families who are racing to the border for things, and not that every immigrant family is in this same situation, but to see that we aren't respectful of what drives someone to care that much about their children's future. And if we can capture that and convert it into the essence of how we lead in education, then I think we'll be building the educational system that we do trust with all of our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I will never forget when I first started teaching, I was a pre-K teacher, a kindergarten teacher, and many times families would come, and I was a bilingual teacher, and so they would ask me, do you have kids? And I remember at the time feeling so offended, and I would say no, and I would have like a chip on my shoulder because there was an implicit kind of like, if you're not a mom. And I remember just feeling very frustrated every time somebody would ask me that question. And I met and married a wonderful man, and it took us a while to have our family. And then once I had a son, then I knew. I immediately, like, it just comes over you and you're like, okay, I get it. And there are people who never have children who already have that. And I've known a few people in my life like that, but they're very rare. And so if you're a person watching this who hasn't had children, it doesn't mean that you don't get it, and you never will. But it does, for me, once I had a child of my own, I definitely can say that, as my eyes would fall upon another child or upon a mom or a dad, that I would get it. And I would feel like that connectivity. And I totally agree with you when you said, we know our values drive our practices, and we have an ethical obligation to make sure that anything we do. I happen to be in a school today, and I was asked to kind of walk through an early childhood classroom and give my thoughts, and there were some things that I saw that really were just about adults, and that's the one thing. And then later you're like, should I have even said anything? But I like there was some stuff that I saw that was really about adults, and I'm like, who is this here for? Everything in this room should be about serving. And the teacher was phenomenal, the kids were doing great, but like there was this one thing that bothered me, and I was like, this is about adult stuff, and it's not necessary. Like what is the environment saying to kids and everything? So I do agree with you. We have that ethical responsibility to really make sure within the best of our abilities. And I think you and I both really are huge admirers of public educators, teachers, especially this year. They have given everything they have, and they've been given an almost impossible task. As I walked around today and looked at everybody in their masks and all the dividers and all the things in a face-to-face environment for young kids, I just, again, was like, I just think they should be having parades in every city for our teachers. But we have that ethical obligation. And I hope that we as a nation can really learn to honor and respect teachers, especially those who've gotten a degree, certified teachers in the public school system, and really support them both in pay, in professional development, all the ways that they need to be supported so that we can have a high quality education for our nation.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
And this year just proved it, but it's always been the case, right? Our teachers are the backbone of a lot of things. So agreed.
I'm going to ask you a question. Just a fun question to wrap this up today. So when you are reading for pleasure, whether that is fiction or nonfiction, but when you are reading for pleasure, when you have a few minutes to yourself, what is your favorite snack, or what is your favorite drink to be having with your reading for pleasure?
That I can answer easily. So there is a drink. It's called boba milk tea.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. I know. I have some friends who are like, what is that? I love it. It's the perfect amount of sweet and creamy and chewy. So it's kind of like I know that it's time to stop reading when my boba is gone. So that's my favorite go-to snack.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
Hey, thanks for listening to this interview. I hope you found value in the conversation, made a connection with your own life, and had an aha moment or two.